I don't know what your story looks like, but I know what it feels like when life breaks you open. When the enemy whispers, this is the end. And it feels like everything you've built is falling apart in your hands. I've lived there. I felt the weight of shame, the sting of betrayal.
I want to start today with a feeling that I think is pretty universal, even if it's not something we like to bring up at dinner parties.
Mhm.
You know, that specific kind of heaviness, when the bottom just completely drops out.
Right.
I'm not talking about just a bad Tuesday, a flat tire. I'm talking about those things where the whole narrative of your life takes such a sharp downward turn that you genuinely can't see the next page.
It's that point of no return feeling, but it's your actual life.
Exactly. It's that moment you look at the wreckage, a relationship, a career, a diagnosis, whatever, and your brain just screams, the end!
Like the credits are about to roll, and it's a tragedy.
And that is exactly where we're parking the bus today. We're doing a deep dive into an excerpt from Redeemer of My Story, Turning Harm to Glory. Specifically, just the entry for day 1.
Okay.
Now, I have to be honest with you, when I saw that title, I kind of braced myself for something a little sugary.
You were expecting the live, laugh, love version of theology?
A little bit. I was expecting to be told to just smile through the pain, or, that everything happens for a reason, line people use when they don't know what else to say.
Right.
But that is not what the source material is doing at all, is it?
Not even close. This isn't a greeting card. It's actually a very rigorous deconstruction of how we process suffering.
Yeah.
It pivots around a specific ancient text, Genesis 50.20, but it treats it almost like a legal argument for redemption over denial.
So if you're listening and you feel like you are currently sitting in the ashes, don't tune out. We're not about to tell you your problems aren't real.
No. The whole mission today is to figure out the difference between denial, just pretending it didn't hurt, and redemption, which is using the hurt for something else.
Those are two very different things.
Completely different.
Okay, let's dive in. The first thing that really struck me was the tone. It opens with this line. The song opens in that place, not with answers, but with honesty.
And that is such a critical starting point. Most advice, whether it's self-help or spiritual, it wants to rush you out of the bad place.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable to sit in the dark. But this text argues you can't even start the process of redemption until you admit where you are. Honestly.
It says, I don't know what your story looks like, but I know what it feels like when life breaks you open. That phrase, breaks you open, it feels so specific, not just breaks you down.
It's visceral, isn't it? Breaking down is like a mechanical failure,
Right.
a car engine.
Right.
But breaking open, that implies you're exposed. Your defenses are shattered, and you are just raw. And look at the list of causes it gives. Betrayal, loss, shame, or wounds you never asked for.
That last one, that's the kicker for me. Wounds you never asked for. I think we can sort of handle the suffering we cause ourselves, If I spend all my money and go broke, well, okay, lesson learned. But when it's something that just lands on you, like a piano from a window, that's when that end myth really kicks in.
Because it violates our whole sense of cause and effect. We think, I didn't do X, so I shouldn't suffer Y. And when that equation breaks, it feels like the universe or God has just lost the plot.
And the text identifies this as the moment the fog rolls in. It has this great line, Scripture tells us something that pain tries to hide. God is not finished when things fall apart.
I love that framing. That pain is an active force. It's trying to censor the story.
It's an unreliable narrator.
A completely unreliable narrator. Pain is so loud, it demands all of your attention, creates this tunnel vision where all you can see is the immediate hurt. It tells you, this is the end. But the source material is bringing in a counter-testimony.
Which brings us right to the anchor of the whole thing, Genesis 50.20. Now, most people listening, they probably know the Joseph story. Coat of many colors, jealous brothers, slavery, rises to power in Egypt.
It's classic.
But I feel like we often just skim over the actual climax of that story.
We treat it like a fairy tale, but we need to look at the specific scene. This is decades after the betrayal. Joseph is the second most powerful man in the world. And his brothers, the guys who threw him in a pit to die, are standing right in front of him, terrified.
And to be fair, he would have been totally within his rights to execute them.
Oh, absolutely. By ancient law, by emotional logic, he should have wiped them out. But instead, he says this one sentence. Read it for us again, but slowly.
But as for you, you meant evil against me, But God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people alive.
Stop right there. That first part. There is so much tension in that sentence.
You meant evil versus God meant good.
Exactly.
I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Isn't there a danger in that phrasing? It sounds a little bit like he's letting them off the hook. Like, oh, you meant evil, but hey, it all worked out, so no harm, no foul.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is the absolute core of the denial versus redemption distinction.
Okay.
If Joseph had said, it's okay, guys, God used it so it wasn't really evil, that would be denial. That would be toxic positivity.
But he doesn't. He explicitly says, you meant evil.
Yes, he looks them in the eye and he validates the intent. He validates the harm. He says, what you did was malicious. It was meant to destroy. The source argues, you can't have redemption without that admission.
You have to prosecute the crime before you can pardon it.
That's it. That's huge.
So true faith isn't pretending the knife didn't go in. It's what's hate? Admitting there's a knife, but realizing the surgery is doing something else entirely.
That's a gruesome but, yeah, pretty accurate metaphor. The source puts it this way. Genesis 50.20 isn't a denial of pain. It's a declaration of redemption. Denial says it didn't matter. Redemption says it mattered, it was awful, but it's been co-opted for a different purpose.
And that purpose is to save many people alive.
And this is the shift from the personal to the communal. If Joseph just stays home, he's happy, but millions starve in the famine.
Right.
Because he went through the pit and the prison, he was positioned to manage the grain for the whole region. The evil was the very vehicle that transported him to the place of saving.
The source uses this imagery of weaving that I really want to dig into. It says, what others intended to destroy, God wove into a story that would save lives.
The weaving metaphor is classic, but let's actually deconstruct it. Think about how weaving works. There's tension. Threads are being pulled, twisted, sometimes cut. If you were the thread, the process would feel incredibly violent.
It would feel like being stretched on a rack.
Exactly. And from the underside of the tapestry, which is where we live our lives, it looks like a mess. Just knots, loose ends, random colors, chaos. The text is arguing that the weaver God is on the top side, creating a pattern that uses every single thread, even the dark ones.
But that's the hard part, isn't it? We don't get to see the top side. Not usually.
No, we don't.
And the source acknowledges this blindness. It quotes the line, you saw the end that I could not see.
That's the crux of the trust issue. The text admits that grace was working even when it felt like defeat.
Felt like defeat. That's the reality for someone listening right now. If you've just lost your job or your marriage fell apart, it doesn't feel like grace is working. It feels like you lost.
Yeah.
Period.
And this is where the source material really challenges our definition of faith. It suggests faith isn't an emotion. You don't have to feel hopeful to have faith. It's a cognitive position. It's choosing to trust the weaver's competence, even when your current experience is just pain.
It says faith takes root not when the story makes sense, but when we trust that God is still writing, even in the dark chapters.
And think about Joseph's timeline again.
Yeah.
We read it in 5 minutes. He lived it for something like 13 years.
13 years.
13 years of slavery in prison.
Yeah.
That is a long, long time to sit in a dark chapter and trust that someone is still writing the story.
It's agonizing. But the promise here, it seems to be about efficiency. The source says, nothing in your story is wasted in his hands.
I love that concept. In physics, you have entropy energy just turning into waste. In a broken world, pain is usually just waste. It just destroys value.
Yeah.
But this text is arguing for like a closed system of grace. It's claiming that God is so efficient that he takes the waste products of our lives, the trauma, the mistakes, the attacks, and recycles them as fuel for the redemption story.
The ultimate upcycling.
In a way, yeah, but it's even more radical. It suggests the very things meant to disqualify you are the things that actually qualify you for your mission. Joseph was qualified to rule Egypt because he understood suffering, not in spite of it.
Which pivots us right to the present tense. The source moves from Joseph's theology to the listener's reality. It talks about turning ashes to beauty.
You are standing at the place where God begins to turn ashes into beauty. I love that phrasing. You're standing at the place that's situating you right at the turning point.
But let's go back to that erasure versus redemption idea. When ashes turn to beauty, does that mean we forget the fire?
No. And I think that is maybe the most important takeaway from this whole deep dive. Redemption is not a memory wipe. Joseph still remembered the pit. He even named his children based on his suffering. The ashes stay part of the chemical composition of the beauty.
So the scar stays.
The scar stays. But the function of the scar changes. Before redemption, the scar is a sign of victimhood. It says, look what they did to me.
Right.
After redemption, the scar becomes a sign of victory. It says, look what I survived so that I could help you.
That is a massive shift. It changes the narrative from a tragedy to, well, to a hero's journey.
It changes the entire genre of your life.
Yeah.
You thought you were in a tragedy, but you're actually in an epic.
So how do we apply this? Because this is heavy, abstract stuff. The source asks a very specific and I think very vulnerable question to get us started.
It asks, what part of your story feels hardest to trust God with right now?
That's a surgical question. Because I think most of us have that do not touch pile. We trust God with the easy stuff. I trust you with the weather, but I trust you with the fact that I was abused. That's different.
It forces you to be specific, to look at that one pile of ashes and ask, okay, you really do something with this.
And the call to action is to actually have that conversation, to ask God to show you where redemption is already at work.
And that word, already, is key. We usually look for redemption way off in the future. One day in heaven, it'll all make sense.
Mm-hmm.
The text challenges us to look for the weaving now. Where is that thread being turned right at this moment?
It's asking us to look for the evidence of the good intent while the sting of the evil intent is still fresh.
Which is incredibly difficult. It requires you to be an active participant in your own story, not just a victim of it. You have to start looking for the plot twist before it happens.
It reminds me of what you said earlier about the fog. This is basically asking us to turn on the high beams and just look for the road, even if we can only see 5 feet ahead.
Exactly. It's an act of defiance against despair. Despair says, stop walking, it's over. Faith says, I'm taking one more step because I don't believe this is how the author ends the book.
As we wrap this up, I want to leave the listener with something to chew on. We talked about Joseph saving people. We talked about the weaving. But you mentioned something in our pre-show chat about the nature of our scars that I thought was really provocative.
Right. Well, if Genesis 50.20 is actually true, if God really does mean for good what others meant for evil, then we have to completely rethink our relationship with our deepest wounds.
Oh, so?
Well, think about it. The thing you are most afraid has destroyed you. The thing you feel the most shame about. The thing you wish you could just cut right out of your personal history.
Yeah.
That specific thing might be the exact tool God needs to use to save someone else.
Whoa.
Joseph's time in the dungeon gave him the specific skill set and humility he needed to save the world from starvation. If you delete the dungeon, you delete the rescue. So the question becomes, who is waiting for the rescue that only your story can provide?
That just completely flips the script. It stops being, why did this happen to me? And it starts being, how will this be used for us?
Precisely. It turns your pain into a credential. It makes you dangerous to the darkness because now you know how to navigate it.
That is a powerful place to land. It doesn't make the pain hurt any less, but it sure gives it a lot more weight.
It gives it meaning. And as the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl said, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning.
Well, there you have it. You're not at the end of the story. You're just in the middle of a plot twist. Thank you so much for walking us through this deep dive today.
It was a privilege. It's a text that really demands to be lived, not just analyzed.
Absolutely. And to you listening, hang in there. The Weaver isn't done yet. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.